we're just barely out of the first week of July. And the first week of July was momentous. It always is. Several important dates. One of them we know, obviously. July the 4th, celebrated in a very different way in this COVID-19 environment, but still with lots of fireworks. Not all going up in the air. There were political fireworks too, cultural fireworks, and people with strident voices screaming at each other on both sides of that spectrum. Also, another very important date, the very first day of July for us Roman Catholics, would be the feast of Saint Junipero Serra, controversial in its own right these days in the culture wars. And with some of his statues being pulled down, notably in Sacramento and in Los Angeles, and other places as well. And I want to share a quote from St. Augustine, also from the first week of July, that speaks about some of the, what I would call smug self-righteousness that we see too often in our culture these days, maybe even in ourselves. St. Augustine, writing 16 centuries ago, addressed that same issue. But men are hopeless creatures, and the less they concentrate on their own sins, the more interested they become in the sins of others. They seek to criticize, not to correct. Unable to excuse themselves, they are ready to accuse others. And as my father might say, ain't that the truth? In that context, I want to share an article that was written by my little brother, my baby brother. He's a big baby now, Robert Brennan. He's a wonderful writer and a good brother, and even more importantly, a friend. I'm using this with permission, but it pertains to some of these struggles that we're going through, some specifics, but that apply to some very important issues that we're facing in our own day and age. His article is entitled Iconography. Iconography is pretty important in the church. It is also pretty important to societies in general, and our monuments and our statues say a lot about ourselves. Gleeful mobs cheering as the latest statue of a Confederate general is pulled down may make people feel a sense of self-righteous accomplishment, but when one form of destruction gets accepted, it is only a matter of time before it spreads, like a coronavirus. Saint Junipero Serra has found himself in the crosshairs of this anarchy algorithm, his sin being a man from the 18th century. Not only was Saint Junipero's statue toppled in San Francisco, but the mob turned its wrath on Ulysses S. Grant, whose statue suffered the same fate. The mere thought of having to defend these two historical giants against a mob gives the mob much more gravitas than I'm willing to cede. And besides, a saint of the church and a man who engineered the defeat of the Confederate States of America and played a vital role in abolishing slavery in the United States don't need my help. A country's history is a lot like families. We don't get to choose what took place in the past, and we don't get to choose our ancestors. If we are smart enough and humble enough, we do get the opportunity to learn from our forebears. That's how we can venerate an 18th century priest without demanding that he be a 21st century man. Whatever imperfections he had, St. Junipero's primary purpose in life was to win souls for Christ, especially the souls of the native population he came in contact with in the New World. And he did so at a time when many of his countrymen did not see these people as equals in either man's or God's eye. I have my own complicated iconography in my very living room. I share this with my brother Robert, too. There in a place of honor is a photo of a man who was a dyed-in-the-wool racist. Not the woke definition of racist, either where he is somehow guilty of that sin solely on the basis of the color of his skin. My grandfather was a man of the South. He was born in 1883 in Arkansas. He had forebears who fought in the Civil War for the Confederacy. Do the math. My grandfather, the only grandfather I knew, believed in a system of separate and unequal, and went to his grave in 1963 believing that no black person could ever be his equal or should ever be his neighbor. And I loved him. When my mom would make her regular visits to her parents' house, they lived only a block away, as my grandfather had to give up family farming in Arkansas several years before. I was always in tow. My grandfather was tall by adult standards, and to a child he looked like some of those statues people are pulling down all around the country. His garage was a workshop of wonders, and I would sit and watch him carve wood and repair gardening equipment with these elegant long fingers. And I was mesmerized when he could take out his pocket knife and cut a sliver from a brick-like chaw of tobacco and wedge it into the side of his mouth. I remember that too. I don't know if we ever said more than 100 words to each other. I only knew he seemed to like me being around, and I liked being around him too. I also knew he used language we weren't supposed to use at home when it came to identifying someone by their race, especially if that person was of African heritage. Our dad and mom would always caution us about that, either before or after a visit. Later in my life, listening to stories about my grandfather from my mother and aunts and uncles, I got a fuller picture of this man. He was not any more anti-Catholic than he was anti-religion in general. He also had very little use for foreigners. But as the Irish Catholic grandson, being bounced on his knee, I was blissfully ignorant of all that. I only felt his love and affection. All my older siblings, who had a lot more time with this man than I, would tell the same story. I could certainly tell that. Life is complicated, yes. My grandfather believed things that are not defensible, believed things I don't believe. But if I could ever be as good a father as he was, as good a son, as good a husband, and as good a grandfather as E.J. Taylor, I would die a man of substance. So I will not be taking the picture of my grandfather down anytime soon. I will pray for his soul. I will thank God for the love this man showed me. And I will ask God to give me the grace to be more like my grandfather when it comes to things like integrity, love, and respect. Lastly, I will thank my grandfather for the gift of his daughter, my mom, and I certainly share that with my brother Robert. My mom, who learned those lessons of integrity, love, and respect on his knee, which gave her the tools to use in her own journey of faith, which led her to an Irish Catholic man from Missouri, and eventually my deposit into the Catholic Church. If I had my grandfather's talent for woodworking, I'd make a statue. So brothers and sisters, I have this deep sense that we are all complicated, not just my grandfather. I'm a complicated person myself. I have mixed emotions and mixed feelings. I have agendas, good, bad, and indifferent. I have a sense that we are all a mixture of goodness and evil, of vice and virtue, that no one can stand up with pure self-righteousness other than the Lord Jesus himself and his Blessed Mother, the Virgin Mary. The rest of us are, we're in T-ball. They're in the Hall of Fame. We want to get to the Hall of Fame someday, my brothers and sisters, so we will do that to the best of our ability every single day of our life. And we will pray for each other and pray for this country in its need. And we are certainly in a time of need. And once again, I will simply ask God to bless you always, to bless you in every way, you and those you love. Thank you.